And while you're doing that, I'll pass it over to Susan Hintz of Susan Hintz and Associates. She will be facilitating the discussion this afternoon. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thank you so much, Marcy. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to talk in more detail about student engagement. Hoping that the learners participating today will have a toolkit of strategies to go back into their schools or classrooms to actively engage their learners. We do know that placing children within a general education classroom is not enough to be included. It's just a foot in the door. This includes all learners, learners with special needs, English language learners, and learners who are high functioning in our classrooms that are often left behind. So the key essential questions for today are: what are the components for student engagement? How do you personally define student engagement? And what are active learning strategies? I would like to stress the power and importance of planning for Tier 1 instruction to engage student engagement. Tier 1 is universal for all learners. It is what we're supposed to be doing in every single classroom so that students are actively learning within that classroom structure. So I do believe, Marcy, you'll be fielding questions and comments along the way.
I can do that.
Okay, so anyone at any time could, my chat box just came up, so anyone at any time can write in questions and I'll keep an eye on that and see if I can answer questions as it comes along. One of the biggest pieces of an engaged classroom is establishing norms within that classroom structure, which made me think of the chat box. And so, like, how are we getting students' attention, and what are your teachers doing to get student attention in the classroom? I will have to say, last week I was in a classroom and it took between 3 and 5 minutes in between activities for that teacher to gain student attention. There was no consistent quiet signal or signal for attention. So I think one of the norms or one of the procedures in a classroom, the first thing that we would have to do is to get student attention. I have used many things with my 20 plus years in the classroom, from chimes to bells to lights on, lights off, clapping, callbacks, like holy, holy guacamole. And now as I'm learning and growing we found that a quiet signal should be quiet. So one of the first procedures is a consistent attention getting procedure in a classroom. So we raise our hand, they raise their hand. I would say this should probably take you between 3 and 5 seconds to have all students participating and add attention given that. I will be sharing many active learning strategies with you today. It's imperative that you take time to use the ERR method when you go back to the classroom when using these strategies. That would be that you will explain them, rehearse them, and then reinforce them. We must communicate our expectations for learners. Consistency is key with the diverse learners that we have in our classrooms today. Understanding that we have to have high expectations for all learners, and we need to communicate those expectations pretty consistently. So administrators understand that when we create a learning environment conducive to student engagement, that we can help all of our students, our diverse student population, improve academic and behavioral skills. So when you look at student engagement, we're looking at 3 components: the emotional environment, the physical environment, and then the planning for engagement. I want to back up to that slide that I just passed over because I think it's fabulous. High expectations are great for all learners, but we have to make sure that we communicate those expectations. You get what you expect from your learners, but you must let them know what that expectation is and be consistent. So looking at the engaged student, I suppose the first thing that I'd like to do is really share with you the engaged student definition. It's not that they are just participating or listening. They must be intellectually engaged in challenging content through well-designed learning tasks aligned with your instructional outcomes. So we want them to actively participate for deeper meaning. And we want to give more students the opportunity to be participants. You'll notice more and more in research we're seeing total participation techniques as a means for formative assessment. I think the challenge as a teacher is how will I ensure all students have access and are able to engage? How do I provide them with these opportunities for engagement, appropriate engagement in the classroom? So with that being said, the emphasis is not on students constructing, it is on the students constructing knowledge, not on how we're delivering the content. So when I started today, I spoke to you about that student attention signal. And a procedure is a way of performing or affecting something and a course of action. It's setting the groundwork in our classrooms using consistent expectations for learners. There are hundreds of procedures that should be in place in a classroom. And so I will go through 5 of them. I already emphasized the first one being the quiet signal. Oh, sorry, I'm not using my correct remote. 1 minute, it switched over to a different presentation, which is never good. So the procedures and routines in the classroom are most important. The quiet signal, or I would like to call that the signal for student attention, would be the first and foremost importance, because I do believe that wasting 5 minutes in between transitions or to get student attention quickly adds up and affects our instructional timing. And the second procedure I think is most important is when they're entering the classroom. I'd like to know how many of you actually do something, bell work or do now, as they come into the classroom. And what does that look like? And while you're reflecting and thinking about your do now or bell work, I want you to answer these questions. Is it interesting for the students? Does it matter to them? Can they do this? I'm going to skip ahead to success starters and then come back to the other 3. So with the success starters, I like to say WIIFM, what's in it for me? That's how students are feeling when they walk into your classroom. Those 3 questions. Is this interesting? Does it matter to me? Can I do this? The first 12 minutes of a class period is the most fertile time for learning. Your bell work or do now should be taking 3 to 5 minutes, maybe a little longer if you're having them work in groups. I'd like for you to think about this in your classroom. Think about yourself going to a movie. In the first 5 to 8 minutes, you normally decide, will this be something I enjoy? Am I interested in this movie? Do I think I'll like this movie? These are things that go through our mind. We need to afford our students the same opportunity in our classroom. We need to have them excited about what's going on to the room. It's giving them something to do immediately upon walking in that they can feel successful with. So when we're looking at that, what types of things can you be doing? I just saw Michelle's success starters at the beginning of a lesson are also great for formative assessment on things that they're already bringing in or information that you'd like to gather. Thank you, Michelle, for chiming in there. So when we're looking at those success starters, maybe it's a new topic. Can I have a question, son? We had one of these just in the middle of our bulletin board, and you can use it over and over and over again based on your topic. You put the topic in the middle of the sun, and students can use Post-its, and they can post them on the raise, questions that they have about that new topic. You can also be doing things with predictions. Maybe you were reading Hatchet yesterday, and you were at a really crucial point in that novel. Ask the students what they think will happen next. How will Brian react to having the plane go down? You may be doing some sorts. There are a number of success starters that you could be using in your classroom. And so I will give you a list of a few more. You'll also notice your handout had ABC Brainstorm strategy. This is an excellent tool for you to jot down strategies that you learned today that you can bring back to your teams. So more ideas for success starters for you. Can you do surveys, predictions, sorts, I worked on adjectives yesterday, nouns and adjectives, and I have the students jot down on a Post-it different nouns and adjectives. Can they then sort them into nouns and adjectives? I already spoke to you about the question, son. And the splash sort label. This is an excellent tool. I was in a classroom and they did a fabulous job last week using splash sort label. They were talking about two characters. The teachers had students list attributes of those characters, and they splashed them all across in two groups in tables. And then they sorted them by which characters they thought they represented, and then they labeled. And then they actually gallery walked to share based on the team's responses. Really effective in having all students participate in an activity with feeling successful. And the ABC summary sheet that you have can also be used in your classroom. You can use this as a great success starter on a topic that you covered the day before, or maybe response to their homework or another activity that had occurred throughout their day, or maybe some personal information to share with others about themselves. So all of these success starters are a great way for students to be able to be successful when they walk into the room. So back to our procedures and routines. We had the quiet signal, which is the signal for student attention, entering the room, students seeking help. Ironically, in the same classroom last week, they were doing small group structures, and so many students interrupted the two teachers. It was a co-taught classroom. And later when we talked during our debrief, we spoke about how else can students not be interrupting you and be accountable for understanding what else they need to be doing. A strategy that I've used quite often in a classroom, co-taught and when I taught in isolation, was ask three before me. If students ask three learners in the classroom and no one could answer them, then I didn't do a really good job of explaining their next steps. And so students seeking help is another area that we really need to have procedures in place. And then any type of movement. It could be from handing in papers to sharpening pencils to lining up for lunch to getting materials in the science lab. Any movement. Do you have pathways in your classroom for students? And finally, your last procedure would be their exit. What do they do when they're exiting the room? Is there something specific that we're asking them to do? 95% of the referrals are written in the first and last 5 minutes of a class period. So it's super important when we're setting up classrooms that we're setting up classrooms for students to succeed. And in order to do so, we must have these procedures in place. So another huge piece of engaging learners are to know your learners. Knowing learners, I can't say enough about that. Like, what have you done this year and what are you doing as you move forward to be able to provide learners with a positive relationship with you? Normally in a classroom, providing them opportunities to share is excellent. You'll notice on your screen right now, you'll see the give one, get one strategy. This is an excellent tool for you to use to gather information and for them to learn about one another. A non-negotiable prerequisite for engagement is an intensive effort to connect with learners. And the only way that we can do that is to really know the learners, gathering facts about your learners, their strengths, their academic abilities, their needs, their interests, their hobbies, their weaknesses. I just hate to put weaknesses on here. And the more we know about them, the more we can plan for instruction so students can all have access to their curriculum. And so I also wanted to share this give one, get one strategy with you. Students would write their name and list 3 to 5 ideas about the assigned topic. Students then interact with their classrooms one at a time. Students exchange their information with each other. So I would give one idea and get an idea. I usually stress to students in the get one area to list the student's name that they received this information from. It kind of validates that everyone's idea is important. A really positive aspect of using give one, get one is that each learner really only has to have one idea to give to participate. And therefore, it allows us as a classroom teacher to maybe help those learners who would struggle during that think time to jot down something with Give One. And for our learners who struggle with the writing process, they may be drawing pictures of their ideas. A positive way that we've used this in our classroom was that students wrote down ways that they study information for a test, and then they walked around and received many other ideas on how to study for the same exact test. Quite powerful when students are sharing strategies with each other and validating each other. A huge piece of this also is to understand that some of our learners have specially designed instructional needs. This is from the federal definition. It means adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. It's planning to address the unique needs based on the child's disability to ensure access of the child to the general education curriculum so they can meet the standards. So often, teachers will see a label and sometimes forget that they're all general education students first, and we just need to plan for instructional process. I'd like to ask this question of you. How many of you feel that this child can make the basket? And so looking at that photograph, those of you who thought this child could make the basket were correct, because I did not give you parameters. I didn't tell you that we couldn't scaffold or give them help to get there. And so really, really want you to think about what differentiation and or access, accommodations, modifications will you make for English language learners, students with high ability, students with disabilities, so they can access your curriculum. When we're looking at accommodations and modifications, accommodations change how they're taught and demonstrate their learning, and modifications change what they're expected to learn. We must know which skills are necessary for students to access the curriculum. And then we have to identify which access skills the students do not possess and are barriers to access. What does a student need to access? For example, some learners may have the goal of formulating thoughts into paragraphs, but lack the written ability. Can those learners use speech to text? I believe for many years that we've looked at closing the gap, the academic gap, and looked at students who might be on a first grade level in a third grade classroom where we would be using maybe direct explicit instruction on short vowels using those first grade words that they've missed. And now we're looking at acceleration. Can we use grade level vocabulary words and teach them how to chunk and decode, and so that we can keep them moving forward with vocabulary development and curriculum based on the grade level that they're in? So really a lot of food for thought. So when we're then looking at that emotional environment, we have to look again at other aspects of the classroom, such as the physical environment. Do we set up our classroom structures, or have you this year, so that the students are arranged for interaction? When I go into classrooms and I see classrooms in rows, it's hard for me to visualize how we're allowing students to collaborate for instructional process. We are to get our students ready for the 21st century, life skills, college and career readiness, which all students need to learn to collaborate with others. And so how can we physically set up our room for that to occur? We must look at the classroom furniture, materials, and the walls and decor. Our desks and seating areas are arranged so that all students can see and participate in instruction. So we need sight lines. We need to make sure that if I'm speaking in a certain part of the room, all students can see me. I'm not looking at backs of heads. Our desks and seating arranged to allow for easy grouping and student-to-student interaction. Is the furniture arranged conducive to student and teacher proximity and movement. So often I'm in classrooms and I have a real hard time getting in between groupings. And sometimes it's just a little tweak to that physical environment to make it easier for me to access learners in a quick and expedient manner. And is there a clear distinction between work area in the classroom, for example, a lab area in a chemistry class, a reading corner, a writing center, and in those centers do we have anchor charts? Are the materials easily accessible to all students? Are they clearly organized and labeled? Are there designated spaces for students to work in small groups and to store and submit and collect their work? Are there student designated areas for their personal belongings, even if they're coming in and out of exchanging from class to class? And then we look at the walls and decor. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Florida, but in Florida, there's a big rival between Gators and FSU and the Florida Gators. And sometimes you'll go into classrooms and the whole classroom is filled with Gator, or the Florida Gators or FSU propaganda. And I'm wondering, what is exactly being taught in this classroom? Our classroom should be indicative of learning. So colors are used intentionally and purposefully. There are anchor charts, so students have access to the anchor charts. There are a lot of visual anchor charts and maybe color coding for them to display the standard and the schedule and the agenda for learners. All of these components create an environment conducive to student engagement. So we have our emotional environment and physical environment going hand in hand for learners to be able to really participate in our classroom structures. So keeping that in mind, that physical environment is really important in those classrooms. And then we look at planning for engagement. I'm sorry to say that planning for engagement is a huge piece of planning overall. I like this Danielson, a teacher's role is to arrange for learning. That is, it's a teacher's essential responsibility is to design learning activities such that students learn important content. And so how does planning and the delivery lesson allow for engagement? A huge piece of this that we must keep in mind is wait time. What are we doing so students have enough wait time in our classrooms? I'm not sure if you're familiar with this statement, but you should wait 7 seconds after a question to have students answer you. That's a long time. I am surprised if you set the timer, 7 seconds takes a long time. I have seen excellent ways to incorporate wait time. I've heard teachers use, I'm waiting for more hands. I'd like to see at least 15 hands before we hear an answer. If it's something they're supposed to locate in text, I'm looking for someone who's pointing to the place in the article where you can find the answer. Turn and talk to your neighbor. All of these are great examples of providing students with wait time. It's really hard for us as teachers to provide wait time and remain quiet. And so we really need to look at that. And when we're planning for that direct instruction in our grade level, I just want you to take a moment and look at this slide, and somewhere on your handout, if you copied it or in your mind, or just jot down, how many minutes do you think is the appropriate duration for direct instruction at your grade level? I will give you 7 seconds to respond to that. Okay, so 7 seconds, that probably seemed like eternity, and maybe not for some of you. So if you are a K2 teacher or administrator at that level, your direct instruction should be 5 to 8 minutes. And if you are a 3 to 5, it should be 8 to 12 minutes. 6 to 8 12 to 15 minutes. 9 to 12, 12 to 15 minutes. And adult learners, 15 to 18 minutes. I would love to know how many of you were correct in your guesses on that. And so when we're looking at that, we really have to look at what does that lesson look like? What is that format of the lesson for students to be engaged and totally engaged throughout that process? As a special educator for decades, I hate to say decades, but anyway, I would say that was my biggest struggle in a co-taught classroom, of not really having to embrace that I do, we do, you do. I tended to do a lot of I do, we do, a lot more than probably most learners required. And so when we're looking at that process in that mini lesson, the connect, make a connection to the past, activate prior knowledge. Yesterday, last week, remember when we, really short, 1 minute. And then name your specific, identify that skill or strategy. Today, I want to teach you how to show that so that you can do this. And then teach and demo. Watch how I listen to me as I think aloud. And then active engagement, having them turn and talk or try out this strategy. Now it's your turn, and then linking it. But when we're looking at this process, I like for you to think about the I do being the connection, naming the teaching point, teaching through demonstration. The we do is the active engagement, right? Are we doing a turn and talk? Are we doing a give one, get one? Are we trying out that strategy? We're going to do a blank at the table with their ideas or their responses. We really need to look at the instructional groupings as we look at the we do. And finally, the you do. The you do may have to be done, can be done independently. Pairs, instructional groups. Depends on your learners. Remember, there are students that require accommodations. There are students who might be struggling with auditory memory, visual memory, auditory processing. There are so many components wrapped into this mini lesson that we must be aware of in order to create a lesson for all learners to access that curriculum. So when we look at that I do, we do, you do, it's also important for you to realize that sometimes during the you do, students can be also instructed in a small group while others are working independently or in pairs. You may have to do another little mini lesson for those learners who may need to hear it again or may need more we do and are not ready yet for the you do. So keeping that in mind, again, we'll be able to allow all learners to participate and be actively involved in that lesson. That mini lesson is really imperative to wrap your head around and to share with others so that they understand that definitely during that you do period of time, all learners may not be able to do that independently. And then looking at what differentiation can we do along the way. And so when we're looking at that differentiated piece in order to support our learners, it's broken down into those 4 areas as a support to many things that you probably have seen. The differentiation is the content, the curriculum, the students' access and how they access it, the process, how we're sequencing it, the product, how they're demonstrating, and how we're structuring that learning. What does that look like? And so I'm going to start with content for you. Actually, it's a good starting point. When we look at content is what is taught. It's the sequence in which we're going to teach it and the level of proficiency. It is that area of understanding our students' point of entry to the learning. The content's not formulated or selected or delivered in a vacuum. It's what happens most and how those standards provide us broad parameters for the content or lesson of a unit. So the facts about students' past learning and background and prior knowledge and current interests and abilities are really important for you to understand that in order to understand where the content will need to be integrated and introduced to them. And when we're looking at the process would be the instructional format. The organizational design of the learning experience dictates how they're going to interact. We could choose from many different instructional formats that go beyond traditional lecture and direct instruction formats, because these formats allow for multi-sensory experiences and active interaction and more avenues for students to interact. Many of our students are not responding well to traditional lecture format in our classrooms, and that's why you'll probably see in the Danielson model and other models the importance of student engagement during this time. Understanding that our physical environment and social climate is definitely going to have an impact on this. And sometimes during that process, when we're looking at vocabulary and other learning strategies that we can do, we have to know that some learners will need more visual access, right? So like a tip chart. Interesting enough, in a classroom this last week, the teacher had the students write down the vocabulary word, the definition, and then they were going to a thesaurus to identify 3 other words that would help them remember the information, and they were copying it. And when I debriefed with these teachers, I asked how many of the learners could read the definition or could read the words that they were writing down that they copied from the thesaurus. And it was an eye-opening experience for them. And so we talked about a tip chart, the term, the information, and we're drawing a picture. And for some learners who don't have the skill to be jotting down all the notes, they could be using guided notes and maybe supporting students with those notes. What do those guided notes look like? Can they have a copy of the PowerPoint slides with the vocabulary and with the pictures on it? Can we change our word walls to tip sheets in the classroom and have those students being actively involved in drawing? Another fabulous way to make this during that process area of your lesson is to look at maybe we're having them create ways to remember information, really giving them ownership of what we're doing. So we have to be looking at those instructional strategies in our classroom matched to the barriers that students have to access that curriculum overall. And so a huge piece of this could be student-generated questions. I love that Marcy gave people the option to write in questions. And although we didn't receive many, that would really allow me to understand what additional information you would need about student engagement to be able to take it to the next level. And what does that look like in our classrooms? How can we do this with our learners? We know that questioning stimulates thinking and it helps clarify understanding and it deepens their understanding. It also helps reveal some misconceptions. That question, son, at the beginning of this hour, when students are generating these questions, I'm able to then understand what additional information they might want about this. I could see what kind of understanding they already have about this topic. This stimulates thinking on their part just to generate a question. Are there students that would struggle with generating questions on their own? One thing that I really love using is the question grid, and I'm not sure how many of you have seen a question grid. Let me get that example for you. Some learners would be given the question grid, and the further down and to the right they go with the question grid, the higher and more complex questions they'll create. An excellent tool for students who struggle with creating their own questions. And so do all learners or would all learners need a question grid? Possibly not. What type of questions would they be formulating? And so can we give them other tools to engage them in that process of generating questions, such as maybe looking at the depth of knowledge information and having them use that. Whatever you're using and whatever strategies that we're integrating into our classroom structure for engagement, it all goes back to understanding that learner overall. Are there learners during this process time, during the process of instructional format that could use scaffolding? And what do some of those scaffolding strategies look like in your classroom? What are you doing to scaffold information? Some of our teachers feel like the student is on a first grade or second grade math level and I have to teach them long division, but they do not have the skills and multiplication facts. How can I scaffold that? What tools can I give them? What types of activities and devices? Can they give them bookmarks with capitalization rules? Can they have that multiplication chart in front of them? Flow charts, calculators, memory devices, checklists, like little cheat sheets is what I would call those multiplications. I'm not going to have those learners step back and not be part of the process. And what instructional strategies? Would it be guided? Is it explicit instruction, think alouds? Am I modeling these activities for the learners? We need to look at engaging learners to reduce the barrier. And so I think in order for us to do that, we have to know their needs, and we need to tailor to their individual needs. I mentioned early specially designed instruction, and on the Indiana IEP resource website, you'll see an excellent tool that you can use to deepen your understanding of specially designed instruction. They provide you with examples of what it is and what it's not, and they break it into the areas of specially designed instruction. So I encourage you to check that out after our time together today. Michelle has just written, many students have difficulty formulating questions without instruction and practice. Yes, that cue chart is an excellent tool to facilitate student-directed questioning, and you can enlarge the chart and have students use question stems to formulate questions on a topic. Thank you for sharing out, Michelle. And then the third area that we look at also is the product. And by product, determining what students will produce to convey their learning. Showing multiple ways, we're giving them multiple ways to show what they know. And how are you doing activities? What activities so all students show what they know? And could it be a quick draw so that students have 30 seconds to 1 minute to quickly draw everything they know about this topic? Years ago in a co-taught classroom, we were working on the water cycle. Some of our learners had to complete the question or open-ended sentence to share with us what they knew. And there was also a multiple choice area of our test. But our learners who were more significantly cognitively impaired had to draw a picture of the water cycle and the components. And they were able to draw all the components of the water cycle. And so they rightfully deserve to receive the same grade as a student who did the traditional test. So looking at multiple ways to show what they know as far as product is very important. You know, it gives them gives them the opportunity to express what they know and their understanding of the topic and of the curriculum. And so I think we have to open our minds to how else can students share what they know and plan accordingly. And so when we're looking at other things that we have to look at when we're looking at our response activities, what active learning strategies are used to address each statement? So all students are accountable to respond. What are we doing? And if you can type in any of your responses, what types of things are you doing? All students are accountable to respond at the same time. And while you're thinking, I'll give you one idea. Something that we did in our class was music freeze. We have to realize students cannot sit for longer than those 15 to 18 minutes if you're at the high school level. So we would turn on music when the music stopped. That person closest to you would be your next partner to have a discussion. I see Michael Taylor wrote mini whiteboards for kids to write responses, then they hold them up. Excellent. And if those of you who are not familiar with Clean Slate, and I'll type that, oh, I don't, can I type? Clean Slate, I believe it's .com. They have whiteboards with the marker and the handle. But more importantly, on the back side, it opens up and you can change the graphic organizer. There are over, oh gosh, there are hundreds of free graphic organizers on that website based on content areas. And so please access that website. Julia was a middle school teacher when she created those whiteboards. And so she likes to give back to teachers and to be able to provide them with some additional things that they can be using in their classroom. I have hold up one color of an object. All colors respond to an answer. Excellent. Thank you, Annie and Lori. Inside outside circle structure. Fabulous. I'll explain inside outside circle structure to those of you who may not be familiar. Students would, I usually have them, oh, I'm sorry, in the chat. Wait, let me finish the inside outside, then I'll answer the other questions that are coming in. Inside outside circle, half the class would make a circle and face out, and then the other half would face them. And I love this because I can have them respond and share and have them take a step to the right, and then they can share with the next person, or even 3 steps to the right, and you can rotate around. I really love that. Every student has a voice. A fabulous tool for our learners. Kelly, the name of the website was Clean Slate. I'll type it in again. It's clean, KLEENSLATE.com. I hope it's .com. I believe it is. And Lori, thank you, Lori. Kahoot or other scan ones that I can't remember. The other one that, Lori, I think you're thinking of plickers.com. Plickers.com is also another website. I really love plickers.com. I used to use the ABCD cards, but the students will look over and see their peers' response, and I felt like it wasn't really a great formative assessment because they were just looking at what everyone else wrote. And so we would use the plickers.com. It gives you configurations. You print them off their website, different configurations depending on how they hold the card. You use your iPhone, and you can quickly scan your whole class within 5 to 7 seconds, and you could see their response A, B, C, or D. So that's plickers.com. Thank you, Marcy, for posting that. Another strategy that you could be using in your classroom is Think, Pair, Share, Square, where the students would reflect and think about an answer. They stand up when they have it. They pair with someone standing. And when they share, then they find another pair and they share again. I think that's an excellent way for everyone to also participate, total participation. Also, if we have A, B, C, D, you might do vote with your feet, where if you choose A, please stand, B, please stand, C, D, really gives us an idea of students and their different ways to respond, but everyone has a response, which is very important. We've also used 4 corners in our room where the students go to the corner of their answer, gets them up and moving. And finally, another great tool in that classroom would be to have them either agree or disagree, and to go to 2 different sides of the room, and which is great if you have a co-teacher, because then you could do a debate on which answer is correct. And you allow them to work with the people on their side of the room and really discuss what they feel would be the correct answer and why. And so that's a really good positive way to have all students respond. Additionally, there are some nonverbal ways to respond, like thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs to the side, which is wavering, I'm not sure. Fist to 5, where the students take their fist and put it in front of their heart. And if they totally get it, they give me a 5. they kind of get it. They give me a 3 or they give me a 0. I will tell you that when you're using FISTA 5, students will be more honest if you say rate my teaching, not rate your learning. And so are there any other things that anyone would like to share as far as all students responding? Any other ideas to share out? I'll share a few more. Exit tickets. When we're looking at exit cards, there are a number of different exit tickets you can use. You can use 3, 2, 1, 3 things I learned today, 2 things I have a question on, 1 thing I love today. You can just do simply an exit card where it's almost like a parking lot and they just post it on their way out. 1 thing that they still have questions on, or maybe they're just solving 1 math problem on their way out their door, or if it's ELA, maybe they're identifying 1 adjective or verb on their way out the door and they put their name on the opposite side of it. Super powerful for you to be able to go ahead and identify which students need additional time in your classroom for learning to occur. That can also be used as an exit ticket that then would generate small group structures for when they walked in the next day. Check by choral response sometimes help with some students. Also tweet it. And so our students would tweet out their answers, which was a lot of fun. Maybe they would text using text talk on Post-its also as an exit ticket. Students really love those type of strategies. Looking at assessment strategies for us to understand where they are and where else we would want them to be towards the end of this. I did have a question that came into me, hold on my email. And these came from Kyra. And they were wondering, thinking something along the way, how do schools put active learning into place for accountability and participation? And how to motivate teachers in their department to use engagement activities? When teachers start incorporating and integrating student engagement strategies and opportunities into their lesson plans, it becomes pretty obvious that student engagement increases student achievement, but it also reduces behavioral issues. And so I believe that the hardest part of student engagement is having teachers realize that it's just not something else they need to do. This is a part of effective instructional processes that go on in Tier 1. And so I think we have to get away from that thought process of it's something extra. It's actually something to enhance that lesson planning overall. And so keeping that in mind, I think, is really important. I think when teachers have some of these strategies shared with them and modeled with them and they see them in action and they use them consistently, it becomes just natural in the planning process. And another question was, where do we find all these different learning activities? I've tried to share many with you today during this activity, like the ABC summary and the vote with your feet and think, pair, share, square, and give one, get one, and exit tickets and post-it parking lots, the question grid and gallery walks and hand signals. And I think that all of these can be integrated and brought back into your school bases that you're at now. Let's see, do I have any other questions that came up? Another one that I see that you can use is Kahoot, Socrative, Poll Everywhere, and Mentimeter for assessment for students in grades 5 through 12. Thank you for sharing out, Michelle. Really important for us to continue to share as we move forward. The next question that I have is that if all students are responding, then what do we need to do to check for understanding? What other activities, what else makes it important? Looking at maybe having students solve a problem on sides of the bow tie and come together and determine if they both have it correct or if one is incorrect, how can we talk and collaborate to determine what the correct answer would be. So again, having those students intellectually engaged in the process to make sense of their learning and making sure that we understand that students will have different access points to the learning, for the learning to occur. So I want to wrap up by talking to you and asking you to, if you could join in the chat for a moment. I want you to think about what's the variable that has, and you don't have a whiteboard, so you can stop and jot in the chat box, what variable has the largest effect on student achievement? What are you believing is the variable that has the largest effect on student achievement? I'll give you a second to respond. Anyone have any guesses for what that variable might be? Parental involvement, engagement, or lack thereof. Right, good one, Michael. Engagement level. Role you're in, a relationship, thank you, Tracy. Whatever role you're in, we know the single most important factor for student achievement is you, the teacher. So when you're thinking about the teacher, can you think of like your favorite teacher, like the best teacher you've ever had? Who would that teacher be? And when you think about that person, what comes to mind? What things about that person come to mind? And if you could just chat in, what are some of the things that come to mind when you think about your favorite teacher? So when I think about my teacher, I think about that my teacher, you'll see in the hearts, she loved every single student in the classroom. Like, that's unbelievable. I never had a teacher that appeared to love everyone in the classroom. She offered us choices. She was very encouraging, and she allowed for movement and discussion. Some of the other things that I'm seeing here are that they were kind and caring and soft-spoken, and they had interesting stories, and she talked to us. She seemed to enjoy us. Organized with lessons, non-judgmental, soft-spoken. I can't see all the chats because they moved up farther than I've done. And so as a closing, I want you to think about the things we talked about today. We talked about those things that are needed in a classroom, that emotional environment. That emotional environment is that caring, soft-spoken, kind, non-judgmental person with interesting stories that go with the topic to develop that relationship. It's creating that physical environment and integrating that purposeful movement built into lesson plan based on their strategies. So I want you to just think, what is one strategy or idea that you can take back into your classroom after today and use? And if you would like additional ideas or strategies, in the next week, I will be downloading on my website, which is susanhentz.com, a list of engaging strategies that you can incorporate into the lesson, into your lessons. There's also a book, The A to Z 2-Minute Active Learning Strategies, you will be able to see on the website also. And so in closing today, I want to thank you for your time to participate, and I'm hopeful that you've increased your toolkit to engage learners in the classroom. And feel free to reach out with any questions you have following this. My direct email is susan@susanhentz.com. Have a great day.